Murder trial of the man accused of killing Samantha Wohl, a woman remembered as a beloved synagogue leader. Thank you for joining us. I'm Glenda Lewis.
And I'm Simon Shaquette. We're following more troubling testimony from day 11 inside the courtroom. The suspect charged with first-degree premeditated murder, and he could spend the rest of his life behind bars.
7 News Detroit reporter Faraz Javed starts us off from downtown Detroit. Faraz.
Today, prosecutors and defense went back and forth once again as the murder trial of Detroit synagogue leader continues right here at the 3rd Judicial Circuit Court in downtown Detroit. Taking to the witness stand was a forensic expert who analyzed the fibers from the victim's clothing as well as a multi-tool knife. Also, for the first time, the defendant's interrogation video was played to the jury. Stabbed to death at her townhome in Detroit's Lafayette Park neighborhood.
And one thing I'm telling you, bro, I don't know nothing about no homicides, bro. That's not my lane. I only cars. Check my history, bro. I only cars.
Meanwhile, during the cross-examination, the defense pushed back, calling the interrogation deceptive. That at the time, the defendant was told that the police had specific evidence linking him to the crime scene. That did not exist, like the video of Jackson Bolanos allegedly entering the victim's house.
Mr. Jackson Bolanos also gave permission, consent to do a buccal swab, a DNA swab, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this was after the deception that was told by Sergeant Ford of him being inside of the house, correct?
Correct.
Jackson Bolanos' romantic partner, Tiara White, was also called to the stand to answer questions about the jacket she later washed, which the defendant wore on the night of October 21st.
Did you see anything shocking about this jacket?
No, not to the naked eye.
Did you see blood on this jacket?
Not at all.
Did you see blood on any of the clothing that was inside of that hamper?
Not at all.
Now, as the trial continues, make sure to follow Channel 7 for all the updates, both on air and online. In downtown, I'm Faraz Javed, 7 News Detroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alternate Point of View. We are talking about Murder on Joliet Place. This is part 4. This is about Samantha Wohl and who actually murdered Samantha Wohl. And as you can see, we are on day 11 of the trial, but today we are going to talk about Samantha Wohl's injuries. We're going to go over this timeline once again, which I feel is very, very important to the case because of where they have Michael Jackson Bolanos hemmed up in this specific time frame of when they believe that Samantha Wohl was actually attacked, and then as follows, she passed away. So the timeline that they have Michael Jackson Bolanos set for this supposed attack and then murder of Samantha Wohl is between the minutes, seconds, 120 seconds of time for him to go into her home, stab her 8 times, and then run away. And this is at 4:20 in the morning. And then you see a figure running away, or so they say, at 4:23. Actually, the figure is a quarter of a mile away at 4:23 on a bridge in downtown Detroit. That is what happens. So from the time that she is supposedly attacked and stabbed 8 times, also has multiple bruises on her face, and then nothing is stolen from her home, by the way. Now, this is someone who they are saying, as you could see in that partial interrogation video, which we are going to go over later, the interrogation video, I am going to break that down for you because at one time in a latter part of my life, is it? No, it's prior life. I was certified to do interviews and interrogations, although not cop interviews and interrogations. I want to caveat that. But it was a different type. It was called Wicklander-Zawalski, and it was for obviously something not, it was crime related, but not like on the extent of police investigations and interrogations, but it was for shoplifters. So my interview interrogation style was different. It wasn't as abrasive, and you weren't necessarily allowed to lie to the person. You had to have proof. You had to speak on what you had, because basically you couldn't do the interview unless you had solid information and evidence against the person to charge them. That's the only time when we brought someone in for an interview, we had enough information to actually charge them in case they walked out of the interview. So I will break down their horrific, terrible, terrible interview interrogation style. Most police departments use the Reed technique, which we will go over that. But there's a huge difference in both techniques. So anyway, what we are going to talk about today is Samantha's wounds, how deep they were. We're going to hear from the medical examiner so that you can get an idea. And you're going to hear the testimony from the medical examiner, because I want you to hear how they did not actually measure the actual depth of the knife wounds that were in Samantha's body. So when she's talking about the wounds and which wounds actually caused the fatal blow, you don't really know, because Samantha basically just bled out slowly. Because as you hear about the wounds, you will hear that Samantha was stabbed several times, but none of them were fatal per se, to cause her to just die instantly or anything like that. So I'm going to show you guys a picture of where all of these stab wounds were, so that you can get an idea of what these wounds look like. So you see there's one on the top of the head, there's two on the back of the head, and there's one right here on the back left. So that's left, left, left. And then there's one in the front, right, like center, right there in her vocal cords, actually, is what the medical examiner says. So the medical examiner states that there is a superficial cut here on her chin. There are 2 stab wounds in the anterior that are angled at the larynx. So here, as she says, angled at the larynx. And then she says they're on the side of the neck. Oh, that's stab 2 is the larynx. It's angled. And then stab 3, there are wounds here in the left side of the neck. So then she says at the top of the head is stab number 6 and 7. And then number 8, this is stab 3 to 5 in the side of the neck. And then stab 8 is right here on the back of the neck. So stab 1, she calls it superficial on the chin. Stab 2. Now, these are in no particular order of how Samantha was stabbed. These are just how she numbered them when she did the examination. So what it could be, and I'm going to do myself with my partner, we're going to reenact several different situations of how this could have happened. Could she have been laying on the sofa? Because as we saw today in today's testimony, there was some piece, her hood, she had on a hood, a hooded sweatshirt like this, and her hood was clearly over her head because there were actual cuts in the top of the hood. So it appears that she was stabbed through the hood. So I want to see, as you guys can see on this, that she has the superficial stab here on the chin. So it could have been the way she was positioned. Maybe that's how it didn't hit a major artery. But then she has the anterior neck, which is stab number 2. The larynx. So her vocal cords were, as the medical examiner says, that her there was no damage, direct damage to her vocal cords. And then we have stab 3 through 5, which are also on the left side of her neck. So 3, 4, 5. Then we have 6 and 7 at the top of the head. And then we have the back of the neck, number 8. So again, not in any particular order, but we're trying to figure out, which way was she attacked from behind? Was she lying on the sofa? Was she standing up? Was she on her phone? As I stated, the detectives have this at 4:20, right? They're saying 4:20 because that is when there's movement on her ADT system. That is the time they're pinning Michael down, because it can't be between the hours what we are thinking, or what I am thinking, after 1:02 is when she had her last contact on the phone with David. She sent him that heart emoji. And then at 1:24, her alarm goes idle again. So it's just sitting there with no more movement. And then there's not any more movement until 4:20. So they're trying to say that she was home from 12:31, where there's movement. The back door is open at 12:35. The back door closes at 12:38. There's movement. Then the ADT goes idle at 1:24. So that means there had to stop being movement for at least 2 to 3 minutes for it to go idle at 1:24. At 1:24, you see a person running from her condos, her townhomes, away from her townhomes. But the police didn't follow up on that person. Everyone who's testified so far has said, not my job, or we passed that on to Detective so-and-so, or Sergeant Joe Blow had that job, or, somebody else had that job, and it wasn't my job to follow up on that runner. We noted it, that some guy was running, or some girl, somebody was running from that condo area at 1:24 in the morning. Now, remember, it takes 2 to 3 minutes for the system, the ADT system, to say, okay, we've seen motion, we're done showing motion, shut down, we're going to sleepy time mode, right? So 1:01 a.m., the front door has motion because it's been open from 12:31 to 1:01. There's sensor there. Something happens there. And then at 1:24, idle. Also at 1:24, you see a person running away from the scene. Running like someone's chasing them, or could be. Nothing else happens to her ADT system until 4:20. You see, it says movement. Something's moving. You know what's moving at 4:20? It's Samantha. It's Samantha moving, finally coming to and crawling her way out of her townhome to get herself some help. Where at that point she gets to the sidewalk, to the front of her sidewalk, in between townhomes, where she then passes out again and dies. But no. The prosecution says at 4:20, this is when Michael Jackson Villanos takes the opportunity from, apparently checking cars. He's lifting handles on cars to go and seize this opportunity to run into her house and stab her 8 times, punch her in the face, the left eye, and have injuries to the forehead, which now the forehead injury could happen because she fell from trying to get herself back up off the ground. All of these injuries on the face, there may not have been an altercation. This could have happened. All of this can be explained, I would think, from possibly, again, she had taken a sleep pill. She had smoking some pot. She was at a very high loss of blood. Her clothes were saturated in blood, so she had lost blood for a long period of time. If she had been stabbed at between 1:02 and 1:20, that's a long time. That's 3 hours to be laying in the floor, losing blood. That she is able to make it that long and get out the door. She very well could have hit her face on the ground trying to, she slid clearly, holding the walls, trying to get herself up, get her balance. She didn't have any shoes on. She was barefoot, so she slid all this blood that had pooled in the hallway. So there are a lot of things that Samantha was trying to do to save herself. She was very, very strong. So you can't say that she didn't try everything she could to save herself, because she definitely did that. So, but she possibly injured herself at the same time trying to save herself. So, well, I'm glad I printed off the pictures of her home, because now the house has sold. It's sold. So, it was pending yesterday and now it's sold. So, we are going to go over the medical examiner's testimony, so that you can hear what the medical examiner said. I'd like to hear, they didn't take any fingerprints off of her body to see if, there could be anything matched. They didn't, to me, do a whole lot of taking many fingerprints at all in the house. They took fingerprints off pertinent places, doorknobs, things like that. They did a rape kit on her. I've mentioned this before, but they have not tested that rape kit. They could still very well test that rape kit. So I don't know why they haven't tested it yet at this point. We're at trial and they've yet to test the rape kit. Because they say she was fully clothed, they don't think they need to test the rape kit. But, you could find out who maybe she was possibly last with if there could be anything there. Also, when I noticed that the medical examiner was up there, I wrote down all these notes. I wrote down all the stab wounds. I wrote down no major arteries were hit, which is why she bled out so slowly, is what I'm thinking. I'm not a medical examiner. I'm not a doctor. So I'm just going to get that out of the way, so everybody doesn't sit here and think I'm analyzing this as a doctor. I'm not. I can tell you this. Okay. I have been in situations, not where I've been attacked from behind. Well, I've been in situations. I've not bled out, but I've been in situations where I could say, she could have been in an altercation. The left eye is the one thing that I question that possibly there was an altercation, but the bruise to the forehead, the bruise to the other parts of her body, her legs, her arms, those are all definitely something that could be from crawling her way down the sidewalk. She could have hit her head, on the sidewalk. The left eye possibly as well. Again, those are things that I'm just trying to figure. Maybe there wasn't time for an altercation, or this person maybe didn't hit her. It was really all about the knife situation. But what I'm trying to say about the knife is they're testing all of these little pocket knives. That's why I want to get into the medical examiner testimony to see, because she keeps measuring. She's measuring how many inches the knife went into Samantha's body. However, they didn't do any of that in the autopsy. They did Samantha's autopsy and turned her body in to the family, released her body quick, fast, and in a hurry, and the funeral happened on the 23rd. Samantha was out on that sidewalk for I don't know how many hours before they finally took her to get the autopsy done on the 21st, and she was done and autopsied and turned over to the family in enough time for whatever they do to be ready to be buried on the 23rd. So that is very fast. And from what I understand with her family, they're not orthodox where they have to have the body within that amount of time to be buried. It's not that serious. So they could have done more, is what I'm saying, but they didn't. So let's check out the medical examiner's testimony. I'm probably going to play it. I'm probably going to play it on faster speed because they talk so slow up there. So.
Your Honor, could you tell the jury what it is that you do for a living?
I'm currently an assistant medical examiner at the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office here in Detroit.
And what is your basic role as an assistant medical examiner?
My primary responsibility as an assistant medical examiner is to determine cause and manner of death for cases that come in on my assigned autopsy days.
And in your line of work, what does the phrase cause of death mean?
So cause of death is the initial injury and or disease that initiates a cascade of physiologic events that eventually ends in death.
And in your line of work, what does the phrase manner of death mean?
Manner of death is a classification system to detail the circumstances surrounding a death created for public health purposes.
And what are the various manners of death that are recognized under Michigan law?
In most jurisdictions, there are 5 manners of death that are recognized. That would be natural, homicide, suicide, accident, and indeterminate or undetermined.
And how long have you been working with the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office?
I started working there in October of 2022.
And what sort of training do you have that enabled you to become an assistant medical examiner with the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office?
So I got my Bachelor of Science from the University of California, Los Angeles in integrated biology and physiology. Then I went to school at the University of California, San Francisco, during which time I took a 1-year break and got a Master of Public Health from the University of California, Berkeley. Then I did my anatomic and clinical pathology residency also at the University of California, San Francisco. And then I did my 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the King County Medical Examiner's Office in Seattle, Washington.
And after the 1-year fellowship in Seattle, at that point, did you join the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office?
No, between when I graduated at the end of June 2022 and when I started at the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office, I worked as a per diem or contract forensic pathologist at the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office in Everett.
Is there any significance to the numbering of the wounds from your perspective?
No, they're arbitrarily numbered.
And just to be clear, as part of your capabilities, are you able to say anything about the possible sequence of these wounds?
No.
And why is that?
There's no way to determine the order in which wounds were inflicted based on an exam.
Okay, and starting with what's been labeled as sharp force wound number 1, where was that located?
So that was located on the left chin.
And how about sharp force wound number 2?
That was located on the anterior neck, so the front mid portion of the neck.
And how about sharp force wounds number 3 through 5?
Those were all to the left side of the neck.
And sharp force wounds number 6 and 7?
Those were both to parts of the scalp or the head.
And sharp force wound number 8?
That one was to the back of the neck / upper back.
And I just want to walk through each of these wounds. So if we go back to the first page of your report, do you start getting a description of each of these wounds?
Yes.
And tell the jury about the nature of the wound that you described as sharp force wound 1.
So there are different categories of sharp force injury. Most common are stab versus incised wounds. Stab wounds are any wounds that are deeper than they are long, and incised wounds are longer than they are deep. So anything I described as an incised wound could potentially be an aborted stab wound, but because it was wider than it was deep, I called it an incised wound. So sharp force wound number 1 was an incised wound to the left chin.
Okay, and I just want to go to Exhibit 22 briefly. If we go to page 23 of Exhibit 23, I'm sorry, exhibit 22, are you able to see sharp force wound number 1 in this image?
Yes.
And of the 2 wounds depicted in this image, which wound is sharp force wound number 1?
That would be the one that's higher up in the image, the one that's on the chin.
And how deep was that specific wound?
That one was approximately 0.2 inches in depth.
Okay. And if we go back to your report, exhibit 21, for purposes of sharp force wound number 2, tell the jury about sharp force wound number 2.
So that was a stab wound on the midline anterior neck. So again, the middle front portion of the neck. And that wound track proceeded from the externally visible injury through several of the muscles in the neck, also through the thyroid cartilage, which is a structure in your neck. It's the Adam's apple is what is comprised of the thyroid cartilage, and then ended in a part of the airway called the larynx.
Now, did that particular wound, let me ask you this first, how deep was that specific wound?
That wound was 2 to 3 inches in depth.
And did that particular wound have contact with any sort of, or impact on any sort of significant parts of Miss Wohl's circulatory system?
Yes, it didn't penetrate any of the major vessels in the neck, but many of the branching vessels were severed due to the injury.
Okay, and when you say major vessels in the neck, what are the major vessels that are in the human neck?
There's the internal and external jugular vein, which drain the majority of the blood from your head to your heart. And then there's the carotid artery, which brings the blood from the heart up to the brain.
And you said those major blood vessels were still intact?
Yes.
And were they penetrated at all?
No.
Okay. But smaller blood vessels were hit?
Yes.
Okay. And if we go to exhibit 22 and specifically page 1 of exhibit 22, are you able to see sharp force wound number 2 in this photo?
Yes.
And where is that wound located?
It's located just above the label in this photo.
Okay. And if we go back to your report, exhibit 21, can you tell the jury about what you observed in connection with the wounds that you've noted as sharp force wounds number 3, 4, and 5?
Yes, sharp force wounds 3, 4, and 5 were clustered together on the left side of the neck. The most superior wound, so the one closest to the...
Somebody's phone's going off. Everyone please make sure your phones are muted.
So the stab wound closest to the top of her head, sharp force wound number 3, that one was a stab wound, and it went through some of the muscles in the neck and then ended in a part of the spine, the C4, C5 cervical vertebrae. So that's the portion of your spine that's in your neck.
And again, in terms of these particular wounds, 3 through 5, did any of these wounds impact any of the sort of major blood vessels in Miss Wohl's cardiovascular system?
No.
And if we go back to the photos, and specifically page 27 of exhibit 22, are sharp force wounds 3 through 5 visible in this photo?
Yes.
And what was the depth of these particular wounds?
So the wound at the top of the image is sharp force wound number 3, which was a stab wound, and that one was 4 to 6 inches in depth. And then the other 2 were incised wounds, so there wasn't much penetration into the soft tissues of the neck, so between 0.2 and 0.5 inches.
Okay, and in terms of all of the wounds taken together, what was the deepest of the wounds?
And the deepest was sharp force wound number 3, so that one closest to the top of the image.
Okay, and if we go back to your report, exhibit 21 on page 1, can you tell the jury what sharp force wound number 6 consisted of?
Yes, that was an incised wound to the left occipitoparietal scalp, so that's like towards the back top of the head on the left side.
And can you describe just sort of the types of tissue that wound had an impact on?
There was associated bleeding in the scalp, and also a membrane that covers the top of your skull. So we call that subgaleal hemorrhage. So scalp and subgaleal hemorrhage was associated with that wound.
So would that wound have penetrated through the skull?
No, it went through the skin, but did not penetrate the skull.
Okay. And how about sharp force wound number 7? Can you tell the jury about that particular wound?
So that wound was to the left occipital scalp, which again is the left back of the head. And that wound track went through the skin and then perforated the left occipital bone. So it's the bone underlying that part of the scalp, and then ended in something called the epidural space, which is a space that's around your brain.
And so did that wound go through the skull?
It did.
Okay. And in terms of wounds 6 and 7, how deep were those 2 wounds?
Wound 6 was also superficial, so 0.3 inches. And sharp force wound 7, that would be about 5 to 0.8 inches.
And if we go back to the photos on Exhibit 22, and in particular page 28, are you able to see sharp force wounds 6 and 7
Yes.
in this photo?
Yes.
And where are those wounds located?
So sharp force wound number 6 is more towards the left side of the photo. And then sharp force wound number 7 would be the one right below it to the right in this photo.
Now, to the extent that those wounds are exposed, were they like that when you first received Miss Wohl's body?
No, to document the injuries better, we will shave the area around the wound if there's hair present so that we can see the wound better.
And you also clean the area surrounding the wound?
Yes.
And in terms of the final sharp force wound, going back to Exhibit 20.
So that was an incised wound to the left back of the neck. So, yeah.
Okay, and again, if we go back to Exhibit 22, page 28, is that visible in that image?
Yes.
And where is that particular wound?
That would be the injury that's right above the label, the one that's furthest to the right in this image.
Okay, and so in terms of the breakdown, again, what's the breakdown between incised wounds and deeper wounds here? How many were incised wounds? How many were deeper wounds?
So 2 of the wounds were deeper. A third wound is kind of intermediate, the one to the head that went through the skull did not penetrate the membranes around the brain or the rest.
And in terms of your examination of Miss Wohl, did you see evidence of other injuries on her?
There were some blunt force injuries as well.
And can you describe what those injuries were like?
So she had bruises on her forehead as well as near her left eye. And then she also had bruises on her right elbow, left wrist, right thigh, left thigh, a couple on the left thigh, left leg and right leg, as well as clusters of bruises on both of the knees and on the left big toe. And then there were abrasions or scrapes on the left elbow and bilateral knees.
And in terms of these additional bruises or abrasions, were any of those significant in terms of your overall conclusions or finding in connection with this postmortem examination?
No, all of those injuries were superficial, so they would not have directly contributed to cause of death.
Okay, and I just want to go through a couple of more of the photos. So if we look at Exhibit 22, page 2, can we see any injury in this image?
It's a little difficult in this lighting, but there is a contusion on her forehead.
Okay, and the next page, page 3, is that a kind of a close-up of that?
Yes.
And if we go to page 4, what do we see here?
These are more bruises.
Okay, and
Maybe, could you give her the pointer to point, since it is a little hard with some of these?
sure, there is a pointer right underneath you. You can
Just because some of that is hard to see. You can go back to the forehead one.
going back to page 2. Can you point to the jury where the forehead contusion is?
Yes, it's right here.
And
Okay, so I want to go back to showing you the injuries again, because I want you to see how deep she says these are. And I'm going to show you with an actual visual how deep she says these wounds are. And here's the thing. The thing is that she does not measure this in the autopsy. She tells this when Brian gets up on the stand, gets up on the cross-examination, and, you know, she just is going off of basically the width of the wound. She's guessing right now on the stand. She's guessing how deep these wounds may have been. So when she says that the wound on the left chin is 0.2 inches, I mean, there you go. It was very superficial. So it was like a scratch on her chin. But what's interesting is the one on the anterior neck, which would be here. Which would be here. Okay. I believe that, she says, is 2 to 3 inches. So I've brought my butter knife because I want to show you, because all the knives that they have been testing are pocket knives. They sling out like a pocket knife. Okay. And those pocket knives, the knife themselves, are no more than, you know, this length, possibly 3, maybe 4 inches. Okay. As a pocket knife. All right. This is what we're looking at in length of a knife, possibly that long. So she's saying that the 2 to 3 inches is what she's saying. So that's 2 and that's 3. So she's saying that this much of a knife got inside to the larynx. We're talking about a pocket knife. Okay, this is a butter knife, but we're talking about a pocket knife. Okay, it didn't cut any major arteries. Now, we're talking about the side of the neck. This is number 3 through 5. She's talking here. These were anywhere from 4 to 6 inches is what she says. These are 4 to 6 inches. That's way bigger than a pocket knife. Way bigger. Do you see the size of that? This is a butter knife, y'all. She's saying that the depth of those wounds are 4 to 6 inches. That's not a pocket knife size wound. Okay? That's a kitchen knife. Okay? That's a knife that someone took out of the kitchen. It's much bigger. It's a steak knife at smallest. Okay? So this whole measurement thing, if she was right, if she really knew the measurements, we're talking 4 to 6 inches. 4 to 6 inches, she's saying. If you tell me you have a pocket knife is not even this big. A pocket knife isn't even this big. So pocket knives are meant to be small and compact so that when you sling it out, if you need to use it for, let's say getting you out of a seatbelt if you're in a car wreck, that's what everybody seems to be saying they're for. It would probably swing out to be, maybe 10 inches, maybe 12 if you have a really fancy schmancy one. But she's saying that the blade itself is 6 inches. Could be, but that would be the entire blade would be in there, the whole blade. That's a big pocket knife. I'm just saying. When you look in comparison to a kitchen knife, which we're saying this is the kitchen knife, and she's saying anywhere from 4 to 6 inches is in her one of her wounds. That's pretty deep. It's a pretty big knife. Just saying. So I don't know how accurate her numbers are. I feel like, these wounds were very superficial. She said one did break the skull, but it didn't go into the membrane. So those were, short, small centimeters even. That's her guess. So these are the wounds that were the deepest, the ones in the neck, but they didn't hit any major arteries, which is why I believe that Samantha was attacked 120 range, because that is when the ADT sensors are lively. That's when there's the most motion, because once her ADT alarm senses motion, it stops because it knows somebody's in the house. And from 101 to 1:24, her alarm was like, okay, everything's cool. Somebody's here. We're on sleepy time. And then it stopped because there was no more motion until 4:20. Nothing that it sensed of any major reaction. Because when you have your alarm system on stay or what have you, it's not going to sit there and just continuously go, oh, something's moving, because then that makes the alarm go, just work overtime. So it's just like, okay, something's here. But if something major, like a door opening or movement in a room that nobody was moving in happens, then it will sense. But in this area, nothing was sensed. So those are my thoughts. They did cut her fingernails off. She didn't have anything under her fingernails, so there were no defensive wounds. She said she would have had some internal bleeding. It would have been hard for her to breathe, obviously. Also, I will say that taking a sleeping medication, taking any type of relaxing type thing like smoking pot or anything that would make you have slower breathing, because it slows your heart rate down a little bit. But as far as the 4:20, so you're basically giving Michael Jackson Bolanos 0 seconds. Okay. It's just not, if she were asleep on the sofa with her hood pulled up, just hanging out, and she was kind of dressed, as I've stated before. She had on a shirt, some joggers, and a hoodie, and she was just curled up on her sofa as if someone had either been there or she was waiting for someone to come over. Again, we have not heard from this friend David. He was the one who was supposed to spend the night. We have not heard from him, and apparently they're calling witnesses in chronological order. We've heard from over 50 witnesses at this point. This is feeling a lot like the Karen Reed trial, where they're bringing a lot of fluff. Today's testimony was absolutely horrendous, but we're going to go over that later. I want to make sure that I am going over the evidence and what the evidence shows. And from what I can tell you, again, as we've discussed, 1:02 a.m. outgoing text message to David, which was a heart emoji. So we don't know if this was a heart emoji. You can take it how you want. It was a heart emoji like, love ya, or it was a heart emoji like, see you soon, or heart emoji like, that's okay, see you next time. Who knows what it was for? But we can see that, I have more questions as to, my questions would be for the medical examiner are, what were her stomach contents? Because when they, go through doing all the organs and all the things in an autopsy, obviously they check the liver. She was drinking that night. What were her stomach contents? What was her final? Did she have wedding food in her stomach? They did say there was a half-eaten banana on the sofa. What was in her stomach? So they could tell. And the reason why it's important to know what's in her stomach, just in case you guys don't know and you haven't watched enough CSI or, Law and Order, but we need to know stomach contents because we need to know how long it's been since last time it was she ate. It helps give you a time of death. It helps gives you when her body started to stop working, when all the organs started to stop. Okay. Also with the lividity of the blood, because her neighbor said she was cold to the touch. That helps you tell how long her body started to stop functioning, because that tells you when your organs started to break down, and that gives you an idea of when the blood started to settle. So that gives you a time of death time frame, especially it happening so recently. It's not as if she was out in the elements for days. Okay. This can give you a time of death because it literally just happened. They're going based off the ADT signal. They're not basing it off of any evidence from Samantha's body. Okay. So that is what I want to know. I want to know how cold to the touch. It doesn't take that long, really, but she was out in 40 plus degree weather. It takes your body drops 1.5 degrees at a certain point. It takes a while for your body temperature to drop, but she was in a certain temperature, but it wasn't that cold. She did have a hoodie on. So it seems to me for her body to be cold to the touch. Maybe it was just because that part of her body was exposed, but I wouldn't imagine that I guess she would be cold because she was covered in blood. So but go out in 40-degree weather and be covered and saturated in blood, that would cool your body down. But as far as the lividity, the blue color, again, I have questions with this neighbor. How could you tell she was blue if you couldn't even see the blood? Again, I'm on this harping about the dog situation. So I have all those questions, but I want to know from the medical examiner, how long does it take someone who isn't hit with any major arteries? How long could she have survived? And I know Brian Brown asked that several times. Could it be an hour and a half? Could it be 2 hours? Could it be 3? And the medical examiner was like, well, I mean, it's possible, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think it would take that long. I think it would be less time, but everyone's trying to fit it into this 420 time frame. But clearly, if no major arteries were hit, her vocal cords weren't hit, no spinal, her spinal cord wasn't hit. She didn't have nothing. She had basically the main thing hit was in her neck, obviously, near her larynx. But other than that, everything else was pretty superficial. I mean, we're looking at 0.2 inches, centimeters. We're looking at centimeters. The chin is superficial. The head is, for the most part, superficial. I mean, it's painful, I'm sure, but it wasn't where her main injuries came from. It came from her neck. Maybe the way she was laying in the hallway, it was bleeding, but there was a way to keep it. It could be numerous things. There was a way that maybe it wasn't so, it was slowly bleeding so that gave her longer time to live. There's so many variables in an equation that you have to look at other things. You can't just say, everybody's different. So the medical examiner to sit there and say, well, it could be this amount of time, I think Samantha seemed to be pretty dang strong. So she does get snooty with the defense attorney. So I am going to share some of his cross-examination from her so that you can see that he is trying to get out of her. How long does it take for someone to basically
As follows: since the larynx penetration was described in the injury section, I did not repeat that description in the internal examination portion.
Okay, but just to be clear, when you indicate that something's unremarkable, that means that it's not impacted, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So the larynx wasn't impacted.
Now, just help me find on the report where it indicates that, I guess, the smaller vessels were, I believe you indicated they were severed.
Yes. I mean, when we're doing a dissection, the smaller branches of vessels are not traceable. And so based on the presence of hemorrhage, you can deduce that vessels were severed.
Okay. But that's not documented in your report that you believe that certain vessels are severed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. As a matter of fact, today, when you're testifying, it's the first time you ever gave that opinion that you felt that vessels or smaller vessels were severed in this body, correct?
No.
Okay. So just to be clear, you never indicated in your report you felt that vessels were severed, correct?
I never said that directly, yes.
Okay. And as a medical examiner, your way of communicating your opinion is through your report, correct?
Primarily.
Okay. And the purpose of your report is to be, I guess one of the objectives of your report is to be as detailed as possible, correct? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason to be detailed is this is a very in-depth process, and you may not remember every single step or finding you may have done for an autopsy that preceded any testimony you might be given in court, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as far as the respiratory system, which I assume, I'm not a doctor, but I assume your lungs are part of the respiratory system, correct?
They are.
Okay. Was there any sampling done for like a microscopic assessment of the lungs?
No.
Okay. And had that been done, it could have maybe provided you some information to, I guess, the degree of the the lungs failing, for lack of a better word, correct? Or whether or not they fail in this particular situation, correct?
Can you repeat that question?
If you would have done this assessment, this microscopic assessment of the lungs, it could have provided you with some information or some guidance as to whether or not this individual's lungs failed or filled up with blood or they suffocated on their blood, correct?
In this case, the histologic findings would have merely corroborated what I saw with my naked eye.
Okay. But just to be clear, had you done the assessment, it could have provided you with some additional information, correct? As far as the condition of the lungs or a potential cause of death as far as maybe suffocation, asphyxiation, so on and so forth, correct?
No, histology would not have provided additional information.
It would not have? Okay. Would it you provided you with maybe the process or the time of the onset of the victim's respiratory function compromise, any compromise of the respiratory system?
Histology is to look at anatomy, and that would be physiology, which is a function, and you can't study physiology once somebody is no longer functioning, aka dead.
Okay, so if you get a microscopic assessment, it wouldn't give you some type of clarity of possibly what happened?
No.
She's kind of snooty to him, like a lot of the witnesses are. They get snooty with the defense attorney.
You didn't see anything on the body as far as stab wounds on the hands or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, which could have indicated defensive wounds possibly?
Those could indicate defensive type injuries, yes.
Okay. Now, you indicated that there were contusions on the face or bruising on the face, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And could those bruises, in your opinion, been conducive or consistent with somebody being hit in the face?
Possibly.
Okay. So just to be clear, the bruising on the face was not inconsistent with blunt force to the face, correct?
In fact, it means there was some sort of blunt force trauma to the face.
And by that when I mean blunt force, that's done by another actor opposed to a terminal fall.
Well, blunt force is any trauma that is incurred due to a blunt, not sharp object. So the ground would also induce blunt force trauma.
Okay, so just to be clear, the wounds you saw were not inconsistent with somebody getting hit in the face by another person, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now you indicated that if there was a severing of the carotid artery, there would have been some type of projection of blood because of the under pressure, correct?
Generally, that's what you see, yes.
Okay. And you also indicated that, from your opinion, there were smaller vessels or veins that were severed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you also stated that they might not have the same type of spurt as if the carotid artery was severed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But would it be fair to say that there would be some type of spurting, maybe not to the same degree, but maybe a lesser degree of spurting from those vessels being severed, correct?
Possibly.
Okay. And just to be clear, I'm not a doctor, of course, obviously. If that possibility actually happened, the blood would project out forward, correct?
As long as nothing was blocking the wound, yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, you try to make an assessment as far as how long you think it could have been possible for a person to, I guess, live after sustaining these wounds. Is it possible that, just you indicated that no major artery was severed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is it possible that an individual could live maybe an hour and a half or something after the wounds were?
Generally, I would expect less than an hour given these types of wounds, but I only see patients that have these wounds who are already dead. So a live people doctor who sees these types of injuries in survivors would be more apt to answer that question.
Okay. So as far as you don't know if it's possible or not for a person to sustain these wounds, possibly fall down, pass out for an hour and some change or more, get up, and stumble outside. Could that be a possibility?
Highly unlikely, but a possibility.
Okay. It's not against the laws of physics or possibilities, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If the depth of the wound is documented, could that give us some type of insight possibly on the type of force that was used to deliver these wounds?
No.
Do you know?
No.
Okay. What about wounds on the skull, on the top of the head?
No.
Do you know? Okay. Do you ever document the depth of the wounds?
Yes.
Okay. Under what circumstances?
I just didn't in this case.
Depth of the wounds?
I usually document the depth of the wounds when they're in areas of the body where it's easier to get a precise measurement.
Okay. And which, just for us lay people, what positions or areas on the body, in your opinion, would be easier to get an estimation of the depth?
Regions like the chest, for example.
The chest? Okay. And what distinguishes the chest from, say, the neck or the top of the head in this easiness of delivering or estimating the depth of the wound?
Well, the neck in particular, it's pretty elastic versus the area of the chest. You have the ribs that are a little bit harder to deform.
Okay. The head is not as elastic as the neck, correct? You agree?
Correct.
Okay. And would you agree that the head is a hard object, sort of like the ribs, or maybe harder?
Yes.
Okay. And you would agree in this particular instance, there were at least 2 wounds to the top of the head, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did you ever try to ascertain the depth of those wounds from the head?
Yes.
Did you? Did you document those findings?
Not in this narrative.
Okay. So you measured it, but you just didn't document it. I'm just trying to be clear.
Yes. Based on the wound tracks, I developed an estimate, but at the time of the autopsy, I did not specifically measure the depth of the head wounds.
Okay. So you're just estimating based upon your memory or looking at the picture, correct?
Yes. I mean, the labels have rulers, so yes.
Okay. But the labels have rulers to, I guess, to give you some estimation on the width of the wound, correct?
Correct.
Not the depth of the wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So just to be clear, when one is looking at the pictures and they see the width of the wound, that can't really gauge somebody or give them any type of approximation on what the depth of the wound is, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So how are you coming up with this estimation then, if that's the case?
Yes. So I misspoke. So general anatomic structure, the scalp is a depth of 1 centimeter. So that is how I came up with that estimate.
Okay. Do you know whether or not this wound penetrated the scalp and went into the brain?
It did not go into the brain.
Okay.
So I'm just guessing. That's
Do you know
what
if it touched
she's
the brain?
saying.
It did not touch the brain.
Okay. Do you ever review the toxicology reports? Okay, in this particular situation, did you review the toxicology reports?
I did.
Okay. And did you find anything of remarkable in the toxicology reports or anything of value in your opinion?
I would need a copy of the toxicology report to refresh my memory.
Okay.
Judge, can we approach this?
Okay, so as you can see, he points out like how long would it take for someone to bleed out when no major arteries were hit. She doesn't know because she works on dead people. She doesn't work on live people. So we can hope that the defense, who obviously has not got as much money as the prosecution, will be able to find a doctor who can tell you with these type of wounds, how long could you survive? None of them hit a major artery. Again, I mean, I have seen lots of crime happen, lots of survivors of stab wounds that have done crime interviews and stuff and been just flabbergasted at what they can survive. So I don't want to put too much stock into her saying that Samantha could only have survived an hour and a half. Any of you true crime or crime fanatics have seen people live through worse. So you have watched Dateline, you've watched 48 Hours, you have seen 2020. Oh my gosh, you've seen some people who have been stabbed multiple times and lived through the wounds. We've seen people who have been literally like centimeters from their major artery, their heart, their what have you, and they have lived. So I would like to see a doctor get up there and say that she would have made it these many hours, that her motion sensor shows there was motion in her townhouse. She was on her phone at 102 and no more phone usage. I know she supposedly there was usage on her phone again at like 129. So maybe she tried to use or grab her phone or call for help and her phone ended up under her sofa. She wasn't far from that area. Maybe she was trying to call for help, but there was someone running from her apartment or her townhome at 124, running away. And no detective, no anyone, evidence person, no state trooper, no FBI. Remember, all of these people are working on this case, figured out who that person was running from the scene. So this is what I wanted to go over, was the medical information and the fast turnaround that they did to get this autopsy done. You notice that she's guesstimating on these measurements. So if she's right about this 4 to 6 inches, that is more than half the length of this butter knife. So you're talking more than half the length of a butter knife. This is about the length of a pocket knife, here to here. Okay. So I'm just thinking it couldn't have been probably either one of Jeff or Michael's pocket knives. I think if they would have searched her kitchen, of course, probably no one could have told you what kind of knives she owned or if she was missing any knives or anything like that. But I would dare say it's a kitchen knife. Also, because in today's testimony, one of the people who were testing the knife wounds in the hoodie said that the knife, something very important, very pertinent information. She said that the knife was either dull or had a nick in the knife. It was a smooth edged knife, but there was a nick in it. So that's very, very important because that makes the knife unique. It makes the murder weapon unique in some way. So I really wish they had done better, but they didn't. So that is all I have for today for part 4. But that is my analysis of the medical examiner. I'm sure she's an amazing medical examiner. Obviously, I'm not a medical examiner. I'm not a doctor. But she did what she did in the time that she had to do it. She did not measure the depth. She guesstimated the measure of the depths. But if that's the case, then someone should have used those measurements that she said on the stand against the knives that they tested. I would think that would be something important to know. How long were the blades to all of those pocket knives that they tested, and match those up to the measurements that she said on the stand, because I don't think those match up. They don't make it math. I'm no math whiz, but I can just say I don't believe those knives match the measurements. And also considering the measurements of the width that she did. If she did the width, do those width measurements match any of the knives? Did they do that? Did they do that much? Those are questions. Those are very pertinent, important questions. Did those knife wounds, cuts, what have you, match any? Did they compare? I mean, I realize you're testing for blood, but did you compare any of those knives to anything? So I appreciate everyone listening to this series. I don't know how long it's going to be because I thoroughly want to find out who actually killed Samantha. I am in fear that we may never know, but I believe that that is a huge piece of evidence that is obviously missing and may never be found, but it is the correct knife. It is the knife that we need to find, that was obviously tossed away or gotten rid of somehow, somewhere. Who knows where it is, but it is a very specific knife. It is a knife that has a nick in it or is very dull, which would be pretty similar to a kitchen knife, because unless you're a great chef in the kitchen, you don't keep your knives very sharp and you don't really care, how great your knives are, because you just use what you got. I mean, especially if you're living a busy lifestyle like Samantha was, she probably just had whatever, and if whoever was in her house did this and used what she had, that would make sense, right? Much like I think it makes sense that it's someone who knew about her townhouse. Much like I think it makes sense that the person who was going to leave her townhouse attempted to leave down the basement and out that door, because it was a communal basement hallway exit area, but realized that that door was locked and had the chain lock on it, and decided halfway down, because there are no more blood droplets that we have seen. Now, keep in mind, they didn't do the greatest job photographing the scene, but from the photographs that we have seen, the blood droplets stop at a particular point. So very easily, the person could have gone back up the basement stairs and gone out the front door, which was already ajar. And since the motion sensor was idling or going idle, it would not have sensed that. So I appreciate everyone watching. Please like, subscribe, share this video. Again, this trial, this entire situation is not getting enough attention. Remember, it was national news. Now it is no news. And I fear there could be politics involved. There could be money involved. From what I understand, Samantha took over a synagogue that was basically falling to pieces and possibly going to be sold. She revived that synagogue, and it went from having no monies to now millions of dollars. And, I understand that they don't want any bad press. I can get that, but I would also hope that they would want to find the real killer of Samantha Wohl. But I could see where ritzy, goody, lots of money talks, you guys. And if they lose any sponsors or lose any money or lose the narrative that they're trying to continue in this beautiful synagogue that Samantha built with the money that she brought in, that would be bad for them. So I can see why they want to keep it pretty hush hush now and keep things moving along. So I hope that people will watch this. I know there's some people in Detroit that are checking this out. They're interested. There are people that want to say things and voice their opinion, but they are probably worried about it because, there's some much more powerful beings at play here than even, any of us. So keep watching, keep sharing, keep liking, subscribe, become a member, give some super chats, you guys. I'm sending Michael some care packages. If anyone wants to help out with that, please do. I will put my Cash App information in my description. If anyone wants to give, or if you just like to become a member, that would be great. That would help out a lot. I appreciate it. Kamsahamnida. Thank you.